And as we all know, moving organizations forward in a business transformation environment really is tied to the teams and the thinking that's necessary to sort of have a new vision and a new business model. And Diane's going to share her thinking and experiences with us. So please welcome Diane.
I want to thank everybody at the SIIA and all the sponsors for having me speak this morning. It's a great honor to be here and talk to all of you folks. I stayed with my first job for 13 years before going to a .com. And I felt like I'd been an innovator at my company before, and I really feel like I was. But I was scared to go to this company where people were going to be a decade or more younger than me, and people were having 15-minute pop-up meetings, and we were doing real-time status reports. It was quite something, and I was worried. And as I talked to my team, and we were talking about the challenges we had in getting the websites for our customers up and running, I said, well, how long does the average site take? And how many of these do we have in our backlog? And it just wasn't working. The team was looking at me, and it was getting more and more tense. And finally, the director of the team, who was a very bright 27-year-old woman who'd been with the company for 7 months, she just shook her head and she said, "Diane, we've always done it this way." That's when I knew that disruption, there are a lot of myths around disruption. One reality of disruption that I just want to let everybody know for full disclosure is that as a result of an executive reorganization at Infogroup about 7 days ago, I am no longer with Infogroup. So just in case anybody wonders. So I think it is important to start off by saying not only do a lot of startups fail, 75% of startups fail in the first year, 70% of all internal disruption activity fails. And there are a lot of reasons for that, and there's a lot of discussion from all the different players around why this happens. And we're all excited about it when it starts, and I think we find that, it just isn't working, and I don't know why. One of the big reasons it doesn't work is because we buy into our own myths about what internal disruption is. We buy into our roles, we buy into how this is supposed to happen. And we also have a lot of roadblocks trying to do this with companies that are already successful versus starting up out of nowhere with nothing to lose. The reason I'm here to talk about this is because while I started out my career, and I still consider myself a marketer and a product manager, I found that what I was really excited about doing was the internal disruption, the change management for organizations. And I found as I moved forward in my career, that's what the CEOs were asking me to do. Can you come in and help us globalize? Or can you turn this product around? It's actually in trouble. This is a great product. It's growing by 30%, but we really need it to scale to more than $1 or $2 or $3 million. And so that's why I'm here, and I think more important than that even is the mistakes that I've made, the mistakes that I've been a part of, the mistakes that I don't admit that I made. But you start to find out after a while that there are patterns to this. So even though I'm going to use some specific examples today, all of them have happened in at least 2, and very likely 3 or 4 of the organizations that I've worked with. So these are trends and patterns and myths that happen time and time again. So we're going to cover, first of all, just a broad definition of what internal disruption is so that we can get a sense for what we're talking about. One of the things we'll find is that that definition is one of the difficulties that we have in executing on disruption within a company. Give a little bit of sense who the players are, because this is important, and then the 5 myths themselves and how you can mitigate those to improve that 70% failure rate, bring that up at least to maybe half, 40, 30, who knows. So internal disruption, from my perspective, is the willful and intentional introduction of conflict into an existing organization for the greater good. Now, usually that's revenue, but it could be a lot of things. If it's not for profit, you're trying to reach new audiences, help more people. But whatever it is, you're intentionally doing this. You know it will cause some conflict or some change within your organization, and you're truly trying to do it to do the right thing. The players in this, obviously, you as the CEO, you are the one who's got your head up and you're looking on the horizon. You're listening to your folks who are the experts in their areas, and you're seeing something that makes you realize, we have to do something here. We're going to have to change our game in some way. A lot of times you hire a disruptor, somebody like me or other people in the organization, to help you do this. People who are outsiders. We just heard a little bit about the outsider perspective. And so you bring somebody in to help you do that. You probably have other work teams too, and I've labeled these the originals and the newcomers. What I would say, and as we go through this you'll probably see more of, is that they're not so much originals and newcomers as they are changers and builders. And I think that that's a very important thing to remember too, and we'll talk about it more as we go forward. But these are the general roles that we're going to explore as we move ahead. Okay, we talked earlier about defining what is internal disruption. And we all see the threats coming from the outside. But I think depending on your perspective and what you're comfortable with and what your personal role is within the company and your personal career goals are, disruption can mean a lot of different things. And disruption and change isn't always what you want somebody focused on. Customer service, finance, these folks are building change and improvements into what they do every day. But it's the very normalizing of what they're doing for the organization that makes it work. So that, and then what great employees are doing every day, which is, I call it owning your box. Thinking outside of the box is great, but owning the box you already have is critical. It's the life raft that keeps everything afloat. And that's what your very best people are doing every day. And some of them might even be disruptors in a repetitive sort of job. But the point is, everybody thinks that whether it's a roadmap or a product enhancement or a slight change or a very big change, globalizing or expanding the product suite, adding mobile to your marketing mix, whatever it happens to be, there's a continuum that people see as disruption. And it's important to know, as CEOs, where folks are in this area. It's also important, very critically, to know where you are. And we'll come back to this chart in a bit. So, 5 myths. There are a lot of myths, but we're going to do 5. And the thing about these myths is that they're partially true. All by themselves, they might be completely true. But they actually are missing the central point and getting in the way of your disruption and the successful change within your organization. So, yes, we need to change. We can do that. I don't know how many times you've probably had people come into your office and say, you just got to fire that guy. And if I ignore it, it'll go away. That's my favorite. So, several years ago, I was involved in an organization. I came in, and they were having some trouble. They said, we really need to fix something that happened about a year ago. We knew we needed to change the branding. We did a lot of acquisition of various newsletters, online and offline properties that had a lot of loyalty, but they were very regional. And basically what had happened was the CEO said, and very truly, very appropriately, we need to bring these into the brand fold so people know this is us. Unfortunately, how that got interpreted down the line was, today the brand is this, and the look is this, and the next time that newsletter went out, online and offline, it looked completely different. It had a different name and a different brand, and all 7 of those lost at least 25% of their readership. One of them lost 70% of its readership in 60 days. So change is important. It absolutely is. But it's a lot more from your perspective as the CEO about taking those ideas that you've got, because there are probably a lot of great ideas in your organization, but taking them and walking them through your organization, the internal aspects of the change, and figuring out what that's going to mean to people. How is this going to shake out? You might not even need to know generally what you want to do, but you need to think, you know what? There's a real opportunity here, but those folks, they don't like change. They really don't. This is not their thing. I've got a slightly smaller opportunity over here, but they've been kind of chomping at the bit to do something. I know I need a lead gen program, and a lot of companies are implementing, especially a lot of companies in our industry right now, are implementing active lead generation programs to take all of that great stuff we're doing out there in our multi-channel marketing programs and to get those into the hands of our sales force. And unfortunately, what we do there sometimes is we send a lot of leads, a lot of new business opportunity to people who are really good at relationship management. And what we find is all this stuff comes flowing in, and after all that hard work, it stops. Not because the folks who get those leads aren't talented. They're very talented. They're just talented in a different way. And so, as the CEO, the most important thing you can do is think about how this is going to flow all the way through your organization. You're really the one who's got that perspective. Where are you anticipating the roadblocks? And what do you think, from your perspective, what is disruption? How far up that continuum do you really want to go? How much do you have the organizational, the cultural appetite for, but also the financial appetite for, the ability to move resources around? Whatever it is, just think it through. There's no right answer to this. There's absolutely no right answer. It's just, what do you think you're going to be ready to do as an organization? The reason you need to know this is because you're about to hire a disruptor. And on this continuum, where you're probably really looking to lead your business or maybe react to some of the threats that are out there. I mean, one of the things I heard yesterday was, who thought we were going to be competing with Pizza Hut? Any hands? I did not. But on the other hand, disruptors are a whole different breed. And we are thinking about disruption in a different way. I watch a lot of movies, and if you've ever seen the movie Airplane, I also watch a lot of bad movies, but I blame that on my husband. You see the guy walk in and he hands somebody a piece of paper and he says, "What do you make of this?" He says, "Oh, well, I could make a lamb or a pterodactyl or a wrist corsage." And the guy just sort of walks away. And that's kind of a disruptor in a nutshell. No pun intended. The good news about disruptors is that they're very, very smart. By smart, I mean weird and irritating. They're disruptive elements. That's what they thrive on. That's what we do. I've heard, ballistics experts, whatever you want to call it. But the good news about a disruptor is the disruptor, if you hire a good one, should be able to look at all of those pieces of the organization. And for example, it's not just about building the product. It's how are you going to launch it? And are you going to be ready to launch when you're done building? Can you finance the build? Does it make sense? What market are you pointing this at? And are you ready to position it properly? And so the disruptor can get into finance and marketing and sales if you're working with somebody good. The other thing that your disruptor ought to be able to do for you is to appreciate the people who are not part of the change team. This took me a long time personally, and I still know folks who are routine and serial disruptors who always think that the solution to the person who may be resisting the disruption is to fire them. Fire that guy, fire that guy. There's a whole different world between human resources problems, which exist, and people who are not change agents. And you all know that. And that tends to be the friction you'll get with your disruptors. The important thing as a CEO with a disruptor is to make sure you've had that conversation. Make sure you've shared what your appetite for change is. At one point, I was working in an organization where I was asked to put together a plan, and actually this has happened almost every time, whether it's during the interview process or afterward. Put together a plan that will double the revenue of this product in 3 years. That's a pretty standard exercise. And you can put together those plans, And you can find things that, maybe they're free or low cost to do. Some of them are going to cost money. But you put a lot of energy into that, and disruptors get excited about this stuff. And you're probably going to have one or two crazy ideas, too, that frankly, you're probably the most fond of. That's the time to sit down with your disruptor and use that as a conversation tool. Hey, you know what? That idea is great, but this is where I want to be right now. For example, I love the idea of incorporating more geolocation data into my B2C marketing. I want to know where somebody is. Worked with a very cool company as a partner that literally could, based on the individual's preference, as I'm driving down the road, it could ping me with shoe coupons. Now, most of you in here probably aren't interested, but I was totally into that. That was very cool to me, and incorporating that data was great. But what I really wanted to do is put the consumer completely in control of their own data, which disrupts our whole back office and it disrupts our whole front office. I was really excited about that. It wasn't the right way to go. If you have that conversation and pull your disruptor in, get them focused on what you want. Make sure this person knows what their decision rights are, because we just go. And it's important to know, hey, you know what? This is the project you're working on. It's important for your organization to know that. This disruptor has these decision rights. And I always prefer, frankly, to put some of these projects off to the side and not try to munge the teams together too fast, primarily because of those different focuses. Make sure that people understand who's doing what. It's not bad or good, it's not punitive, it's just putting the skill sets against the right opportunity. So, as you start to do what you're doing, and I actually like to use a startup example here rather than an internal disruption, because I think we hear a lot about startups being real agents of change, and they're agents of change, and they're out there changing everything and disrupting our businesses, and they move fast and they decide fast. And I've been involved in some internal and external startups in the form of acquisitions and actually being part of the business. The types of people don't change. There are, for example, I call them the gypsies, and I think you heard from one in the keynote speech yesterday. People who go around within their own organization effecting change. That's what they do. They don't stay in a job very long. They move from product to project throughout their organization. There are also people I like to call the serial originals. These are the people you hire who embed themselves in the organization. People love them, they get stuff done, and they want to be part of the company. That's what they're really thinking about. The important thing is these two folks, first of all, they're not aware that it's a different mindset, it's a different preference, it's a different lifestyle. My husband really enjoys being an original. He likes to go in and work on a project and build it. He likes to own that box. I'm a squirrel person. That's probably pretty obvious. But you get these two people in a room talking about what they do, and the first thing I'm going to ask is, how long on average does it take to make a sale? And the first thing an original is going to say to me is, look, every customer's different. It takes different amounts of time. What it sounds like there is we're both being jerks to each other. What's actually happening is me being new, I need to find context enough to do a job. And so I'm looking for big pieces of information and also trying to establish some commonality. I'm going to look for the similar stuff. Oh, hey, in my last job, that happened too. What the original's trying to do is illustrate that there is some real nuance here that if you don't know, you could break our business. And I'm responsible for all the success this business has had for the past 20 years, so I'm a little concerned about that. So you've got different people speaking different languages. The other thing I think is very important that is a harsh reality of this is we cannot minimize or ignore the risk, the very real risk that these folks face. Let's face it, if you've got to shift resources around, somebody might lose their job. If the newcomers, if 70% of those projects fail, people are going to be shifted in and out of an organization. When change happens, people are scared. You know, we're all pretty high up. We're lucky enough to be high up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it's really hard to just say, hey, you know what? Yeah, you got to cut my project. I totally get that. It makes total sense to the company. I don't have the skills to do that job. Or I just think, yeah, go ahead and let all those folks go. It's personal to these folks. They're invested in it, whatever they do in it, and that is driving a great deal of how they're reacting. That's the most important thing to remember here, and I think where management and leadership blends for you is right here. And this is probably the place where most programs go south. A guy who worked for me a few years ago, absolutely terrific, but because the organization wasn't doing demand generation, he was very frustrated. His skills weren't being used, and as we started to do that in this company, this guy just absolutely blossomed. Somebody who was on the bubble was on his way out, and I was told, you're probably going to end up having to get rid of this guy. He ended up doing a terrific job for the company, for himself. He was happy. When change happened, because he's not a lover of change, there's really nothing wrong with the change that happened. He actually sabotaged his new boss simply because he didn't care for the way things were going. It's a tough and dangerous area, and the leadership piece, the understanding the people that you have working for you and what they're going to respond to, what they do well, communicating to them why you're doing these changes, what it's going to mean to the organization if you have to shift money around or resources around, and being very clear about who decides what is critical. So, you think about this in terms of high context or low context, structured work or unstructured work. The most important point is there's a big difference between what somebody enjoys doing, what they're built to do, what they like to do, and what just isn't their strongest skill set. Everybody can learn, and everybody doesn't fit in a box, but people do prefer to do what they like to do, and it's important to know that. And I would say here, it's all about building change alongside and reintegrating it back in. Let your changers change, and let your builders build. Those folks can scale a business. These folks can go find a new business. This one, honestly, I just like this graphic because it was kind of a combination of you can't put the genie back in the bottle and what are you smoking? It will not go away. We all know that. This is very hard and very challenging, but you can't stop. And the whole existing organization might well be watching you to see what your resolve is. And understanding how far you want to go with this, what you really need to do, how quickly you need to move is important. Understanding your own personal resolve and anticipating the resistance that will happen, the confusion that will happen, and the chaos that's going to happen is critical. So it's not easy. This is a very difficult task because you are herding a lot of cats. You're working with people who have built your business for you, who are invaluable assets, who drive all of your revenue today, and you're trying to build your revenue for the future at the same time. You are doing double the work of any startup, and it is incredibly challenging. Focusing on the communication and the clear decision rights, understanding your own appetite and your organization's need, appetite, and timeline for that change is critical. Putting the right people against it and being really clear to them why is also important. Staying very involved with your disruptor and making sure that your organization understands how strongly you're behind the project, but then also, frankly, reining your disruptor in when you need to, are how you're helping make this happen. One of the movies I watch is The Untouchables. It's the newer version, actually, with Kevin Costner and Sean Connery. And Sean Connery is the cop who's been around a long time working with this disruptor. disruptors, young and eager, and they're sitting in a church. And Sean Connery says, in order to get Al Capone, they're going to get Al Capone, what are you prepared to do? And he says, anything within the law. And Sean Connery says, and then, what are you prepared to do? You got to know what you're prepared to do, think it all the way through, make sure you've thought of those scenarios, but what are you prepared to do? This is a challenge. It's also a lot of fun. But I thank you very much for your time today, and if there are any questions for me, I'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
Hi, Mike Browning with LexisNexis. You talked a lot about a sharp focus on decision rights. Mm-hmm. But doesn't that also stifle innovation?
That's a really good question. Does a focus on decision rights stifle innovation? And I think that's a really good question because lately in the news we've seen, I don't know if it was specifically Amazon or Zappos, but they said, we're getting rid of all managers. And that makes a nice headline, but what they're actually doing is driving decision rights down where they need to be. That makes a lot of sense. Ideas are the responsibility of everybody. That should always be the responsibility of everybody, but what happens with those ideas once they're born is what decision rights are all about. The startups out there have mobilized around a single idea. They've got experts who are morphing that idea, and it may change. But they have come together and they understand who the experts are, and they're letting the experts in the organization make the decisions. If you have a great idea, how do you get it built? How do you know where to go for funding? If we all sit in a room and have a great brainstorming session and then we walk away, we know how that can just dissipate. You build a proposal, and then you never get approval for it. I actually had a discussion about a product, and it was going to require some investment, but we didn't really know what, and I found out that the engineering guy had put in a request for $500,000 for new equipment for this project. We hadn't even decided to do it yet. Just understanding how that should work facilitates innovation much more than it hinders it. That's my position anyway.
One more question. Diane, can you talk a little bit more about empowering disruptors and incentivizing disruptors? Obviously, a disruptor is not rewarded in some way for their disruption, right?
Yes.
Or if they don't see their disruption come to fruition, they're simply going to be stifled and sit back in their chair and do what they do every day.
That is so true, and that's the downside of being a disruptor. I love everything about being a disruptor except the frustration that happens when you get wound up about something and you find out, either you haven't made the case for it or there isn't enough money to do it. And that's why that initial conversation with your CEO and the ongoing conversation about the appetite and the reality behind it. There are lots of things you can do within an organization that don't cost anything. But sometimes you're going to have to redeploy resources to do it. I think that disruptors, as a general rule, are very much excited about the doing, very much excited about the achievement. And so if you can give them the alongside project versus trying to change an established practice that frankly is funding all this other stuff, you probably give them what they really want, which is the excitement of being able to get things done. And I think just being very clear to them about what you're willing, the chain you're willing to put them on, how far they can go, and making sure you're both agreed will be the best thing you can do for your disruptors.
For insights and the lessons learned.
Thank
Let's
you.
give Diane
Thank you,
a round of
everybody.
applause.